All right, let's dive into a world of waterways today. This one's pretty special. Just imagine a river that someone decided to just add a canal to.
Yeah.
It's the Driffield Navigation, and its story is full of twists and turns, just like the river itself.
You know what immediately struck me? This waterway, it isn't just a simple canal. It's this blend of a man-made canal, the northern part, and then the southern part is actually the title River Hull.
So it changes personality as it goes along.
Yeah.
So why was it built in the first place?
Well, if we cast our minds back to the 1760s, Driffield was this really bustling market town, and the merchants there, they needed to move their goods, and the River Hull, as it was navigable, but it wasn't really suitable for the larger vessels.
So who had the bright idea to come up with this sort of dual personality waterway?
Well, the merchants of Driffield, they called on the expertise of some big names, big engineering names of the day, and they got the opinions of John Smeaton.
Smeaton? Lighthouses, was it?
Famous for lighthouses.
Yeah.
And then John Grundy Jr., who was a canal engineer.
So it was a bit of a face-off.
A little bit of a battle of the engineers.
Who won out in the end?
Well, Smeaton, he suggested this shorter cut, just about 1¼ miles with just one lock.
Yeah.
And then Grundy, he proposed this much longer cut, a 5-mile cut from Fishholm to Driffield, and this would include a basin right in the heart of Driffield.
I can already sense some tension, so who won out?
Grundy's vision was the one they went for. And so the River Hull and Frothingham Back Navigation Act of 1766 was passed, and that really set the wheels in motion for the building of this canal.
So between 1768 and 1770,
the Driffield Navigation opened in stages.
This blend of river and canal.
River and canal.
Yeah. So what was it like navigating this brand new waterway?
Well, imagine you've got these Humber keels gracefully passing through a series of 4 locks.
4 locks.
These were all timber-floored locks.
Right.
And we're talking about Sheepwash Lock, which was later renamed Town Lock.
Okay.
Windhill Lock, Wansford Lock, and Snakeholm Lock.
Snakeholm Lock.
Got a great name, doesn't it?
I love that. A little bit ominous, though. Snakeholm Lock.
Well, Snakeholm Lock is particularly interesting because remember how we said that the southern part of the navigation is a tidal river?
Right. The dual personality.
The dual personality, dealing with those fluctuating water levels, it was a challenge. And to overcome this, they transformed the single Snakeholm Lock into a 2-lock staircase.
Oh, a staircase.
A staircase, yeah.
It's
like steps for boats. So imagine you've got a set of locks, one right after the other,
right.
And the boat would enter that bottom lock, the gates would close, the water would pump in, and it would lift the boat up to the next level,
right.
And then they would repeat the process.
Oh, wow.
It's like climbing a watery staircase.
That is genius.
Pretty amazing, isn't it?
Yeah, and that really helped the boats navigate the tidal changes.
It did.
And it just shows the lengths that they went to.
Yeah, to make it work. And you've got to remember, this was the 18th century.
This is pioneering stuff.
Yeah, they were pushing the boundaries of engineering.
I bet it wasn't always plain sailing, so to speak.
Yeah.
Keeping this waterway, this innovative waterway running.
Well, certainly not in the early years. There were a lot of financial challenges, and I think achieving the kind of profits that they hoped for proved to be a bit of a challenge.
Keeping it afloat, literally and figuratively.
Literally, yeah, absolutely.
So what other obstacles did they face?
Well, this might sound a bit strange, but it was a bridge.
A bridge?
A bridge, and it was called Hull Bridge, and this was owned by the Beverly Corporation, and it was just a small bridge. But it caused a major headache because it had this restricted opening.
Yeah.
And it meant that larger vessels really struggled to pass through.
So you can imagine these big Humber keels.
Exactly. Getting stuck at this bridge.
Yeah.
The merchants would be fuming because they relied on the waterway for their livelihood. Well, there are years and years of these protracted negotiations. The merchants are getting increasingly frustrated.
Yeah.
And the Beverly Corporation are just sort of digging their heels in. But eventually in 1801, a deal was struck.
Okay, so what was the solution? Did they just demolish the old bridge?
They did. They demolished the old bridge. But this is where it gets really interesting because Richard Bethel, who was the owner of the Leven Canal,
right.
He saw an opportunity here. And he actually offered to fund half the cost of a brand new bridge.
Wow.
In exchange for reduced tolls on the Driffield Navigation.
That was pretty savvy.
Pretty shrewd, isn't it?
Yeah.
So the new bridge was built.
Okay, and that solved the bottleneck problem?
Absolutely, it did.
Great.
But it doesn't end there.
Oh.
Along with the new bridge, they also constructed a new lock at Struncheon Hill,
Okay.
and they created a new cut to bypass a large bend in the river. But I think it really reflects how they approach these improvements.
Okay.
They didn't just abandon what was already there, they incorporated the new while keeping the old.
Right. When they built that new lock and bridge we were just talking about,
Yeah.
it actually created a separate section of the navigation.
Really? So for a while, there were two distinct parts of the waterway.
Yeah. And get this, they ran independently for years. It wasn't until 1888 that they were finally joined together.
Wow, that's almost a century with two parts of the same waterway operating separately.
I know, right?
Huh.
Talk about confusing.
I can't imagine the logistical headaches that must have caused.
Yeah.
But tell me, what kind of vessels would we have seen back in the day? Were they like the classic canal barges we often see?
There were two main types that were really common on the Driffield Navigation: keels and sloops.
Keels and sloops, I'm not familiar with those. What are they like?
Well, imagine large, sail-powered cargo boats designed to navigate both the canal and the open waters of the Humber estuary.
Wow. So they were designed to handle both inland and coastal waters. That's pretty versatile.
It is. They were the workhorses of the navigation, transporting all sorts of goods to and from the bustling port of Hull.
I can picture them now, their sails billowing in the wind as they make their way along the waterway.
Now, close your eyes for a second and imagine you're standing on the banks of the Driffield Navigation back in its heyday.
Okay, I'm there.
The sources paint such a vivid picture. Imagine the bustling scene at Riverhead.
Riverhead, okay.
There's an old painting of a barge docked there, surrounded by workers loading and unloading cargo. You can practically hear the clanking of chains, the shouts of the workers, and the creaking of the wooden planks. And nearby, there's a crane in action, a testament to the growing scale of trade on the waterway.
It's all coming to life. The sights, the sounds, I can almost smell the salty air and the wood tar.
Exactly. And let's not forget those gruff old keel captains, the guys who knew the navigation like the back of their hand.
Oh, yeah. Those seasoned sailors.
They face all sorts of challenges, navigating tricky currents, narrow locks, unpredictable weather, and even, as we mentioned earlier, those bureaucratic hurdles.
I bet they had some amazing stories to tell.
I'm sure they did.
It's amazing to think those boats were once a common sight.
It is. But, while we're talking about changes, I'm curious about the impact of the railway.
Ah, yes. The railway.
The sources mentioned that it arrived in Driffield in 1846.
Right.
You'd think that would be the end of the line for a canal. With a faster and more modern way to transport things around, who would need a slow, old waterway?
Yeah, yeah. It's interesting how these new technologies often disrupt existing industries, but I guess the Driffield Navigation must have found a way to adapt.
They did. It actually continued to be a success, even with the railway competing for business.
Wow, that's surprising. How did they manage to do that?
Well, it seems that they really focused on cargo that needed that local touch.
The stuff that the railway couldn't handle as easily.
Exactly. And those boatmen, they knew every twist and turn of that waterway like the back of their hand.
So it was all about playing to their strengths, finding their own niche in a changing world.
Exactly. What happened when the traffic started to decline?
Well, if you've got less traffic using it, you've got less profits.
Right.
And if you've got less profits, there's less money to spend on maintenance. And so it kind of falls into a bit of a state of neglect.
Sad, but inevitable, I guess.
Yeah, it's a pattern that we see time and time again.
Yeah, so when did commercial traffic finally stop using it?
Well, the last commercial craft actually reached Driffield in 1945, and that was carrying a cargo of wheat. Kind of a poignant end to an era, really.
Yeah.
And then it was officially closed in 1951.
So it just fell into disrepair.
Well, it's interesting because when the original commissioners who were in charge of the Driffield Navigation passed away,
Right.
there was no clear legal owner.
So everyone sort of forgot who was in charge.
A little bit, yeah.
Yeah.
And that made any kind of restoration efforts really difficult.
Yeah, so nobody could really do anything.
Yeah, but you mentioned earlier that the Driffield Navigation is making a comeback.
It is. And that's where things get really interesting. It all started when Hull Corporation proposed using the canal for water supply back in 1959.
Oh. So they wanted to repurpose the waterway. I guess that makes sense from a practical standpoint, but what about its historical significance?
That's exactly what people were worried about.
Yeah.
This proposal would have essentially meant the end of the Driffield Navigation as a navigable waterway.
So it was a bit of a save our canal moment.
Exactly. And that threat sparked a whole movement. They formed a group called the Driffield Navigation Amenities Association, or DNAA for short. They were determined to bring the Driffield Navigation back to life.
That's so inspiring.
But they faced a unique problem. The original commissioners, the folks who had legal responsibility for the waterway, were long gone. So the DNAA had to get creative.
Oh, wow. So they were passionate, but they also had to be clever to navigate those legal waters.
Exactly. They came up with this brilliant plan. They established the Driffield Navigation Trust, a charitable organization that could be recognized by the Charity Commission.
Smart move. So that gave them the legal standing to take over the reins.
Exactly. It was a game changer. The trust became the new commissioners. They had the authority to manage and restore the Driffield Navigation. When did the restoration work begin?
Well, it began in earnest in 1978, and initially they focused on making the lower reaches accessible again.
Right.
It was a gradual process, but it really showed their commitment to the project.
So what were some of the key things that they did?
Well, in 1996, they restored Town Lock.
Yeah.
Remember that was originally Sheepwash Lock? And then in 2003, Brigham Swing Bridge and our favorite, Snakeholm Lock, were brought back to life.
That must have been amazing to see that working again.
Absolutely.
How did they manage to fund all of this?
It was a lot of fundraising.
Right.
It was a lot of volunteers. It was a real community effort.
The power of people, isn't it?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
It's amazing what can be achieved.
So what other successes did they have?
Well, in 2005, they restored Win Hill Lock, which meant boats could actually get through there after all those years.
Right.
And then in 2009, Wansford Lock was restored.
Yeah.
And that reopened a section that had been closed for over 60 years.
That's incredible. It's amazing how much they've achieved.
Yeah.
So is it fully restored today?
It's a work in progress.
Right.
There are still challenges. I mean, for example, there's a fixed bridge over the Snakeholm Locktail
Yeah.
that restricts headroom for some boats. And then there's the fixed bridge at Wansford,
Right.
which stops boats reaching Driffield itself.
So they've come a long way.
Yeah.
But there's still a way to go.
Yeah.
Let's take a break and come back to uncover the rest of the Driffield Navigation's fascinating story.
Sounds good to me. I'm hooked. It really makes you think, about the bigger picture. Like, imagine the Driffield Navigation fully restored, reaching all the way to Driffield like it was supposed to.
Right. Like it was back in the day.
Exactly. It could totally change things for the local economy.
More boats, more visitors, more people spending money at shops and restaurants. Maybe even new businesses popping up just to handle all the tourists.
Exactly. It's not just about money, though. It's about the whole community coming back to life.
Yeah. People walking along the towpath, families going on boat rides, anglers, finding their little fishing spots.
Mm-hmm. Right. And making the whole region more attractive, for people to live, work, visit. But speaking of challenges, remember those low bridges we talked about earlier?
Yeah, the ones that are kind of in the way.
Let's dig into those a little more.
Yeah, tell me about them.
The one at Wansford, that's a major roadblock.
Remind me, what's the issue there?
Well, the bridge there now, it was put in back in the 1960s.
Okay.
It's like a concrete wall, basically. Boats can't get past it.
So even with all the work they're doing, fixing locks and everything, boats still can't make the whole trip to Driffield.
That's the situation right now, yeah.
That's so frustrating. After all that effort?
Yeah, the sources talk about this one celebratory cruise they had. They were going down the canal and everything.
Right.
But then, bam, they hit the Wansford Bridge, and that was it.
Oh,
The boats were stuck, on either side.
so close yet so far.
Exactly. So the trust, they're pushing hard for a new bridge.
One that boats can actually go under.
Yep. But I got to talk to the local authorities first.
I bet those conversations are interesting. What are the arguments for and against replacing the bridge?
It's all about balancing the costs and benefits,
Right.
The trust wants a fully navigable waterway, but the authorities, they're worried about the price tag and about traffic getting messed up while they build it.
But wouldn't a waterway that actually works bring in more money over time? Seems like a good argument for a new bridge.
That's exactly what the trust is saying.
Makes
They're
sense.
saying, hey, more tourists, more business for everyone. It'll make the whole area better.
Right. It's got to be a tough decision, like short-term pain for long-term gain.
Exactly. But I think the fact that the Driffield Navigation is so historically important, that adds another wrinkle.
True. It's not just about the money. It's about preserving something, from the past.
Right. It's part of our heritage.
Okay, so Wansford is one problem. What about that other low bridge, the one at Win Hill Lock? Is that as bad?
It's a little different. That bridge used to swing open, you see.
So boats could pass?
Yeah.
But then, sometime in the 1950s, they fixed it in place.
Oh, so another example of something that worked for boats, and then nope, not anymore.
Right. They did fix the lock itself in 2005. It's open again.
Yeah.
But that bridge, it limits the size of boats that can get through. Like the sources say only boats up to 15 feet can pass.
15 feet? That's tiny.
Yeah, a far cry from those big Humber keels for sure.
So even though the lock is working, it's not really working as well as it could.
Sadly, that's true.
It shows that restoring the Driffield navigation isn't just about fixing the obvious things like locks.
You got to deal with all these little modern-day roadblocks that popped up over the years.
Seems like a real puzzle. Trying to make everything work, the modern stuff and the historic waterway.
It is. But the trust, they seem pretty determined to solve it.
They haven't given up.
Not at all. Remember, they didn't even officially own the navigation when they started all this.
Yeah. That's amazing.
It's truly inspiring what people can do when they're passionate about something. It gives me hope that even with all these challenges, the Driffield navigation will be okay.
I think so too. It's survived a lot in its time. And with the trust and the community behind it, I'm sure it will keep going strong.
Speaking of the restoration, what about the DNAA, that group that got everything started?
A lot of those early members are still involved somehow, even if it's just as supporters.
Yeah, cheering from the sidelines.
Their impact is still felt, for sure. They got people excited about the Driffield navigation, and that passion is still alive.
It's amazing how a few dedicated people can make such a big difference.
It really is. So we've talked about the challenges and the successes, but what about some of the less obvious benefits of having a restored waterway? Like, what are the hidden gems, so to speak?
That's a great question. It's not just about the economics or having a place to go boating. It's got to be more than that, right?
Right. Think about the sense of identity and pride it brings to a community.
Yeah, like rediscovering their roots.
Exactly. It's a living connection to their history, and it shows what people can do when they work together.
And it's inspiring too, right? Like a symbol of, resilience.
Absolutely. And we can't forget about the environmental benefit.
Oh, right. It's good for nature too.
Definitely. The Driffield navigation creates a corridor for wildlife. All sorts of plants and animals benefit from it, and it can even help with flooding.
Oh, wow. Like a natural sponge.
Exactly. So it's not just a pretty place to visit. It's an important part of the ecosystem.
So as we're wrapping up this part of our deep dive, what's the thing that stands out most to you about the Driffield navigation?
It's the people, for sure. Their dedication is incredible. From the DNAA to the trust, they've worked so hard to bring this waterway back to life, and they're not stopping anytime soon.
They're in it for the long haul.
Yeah. It gives me hope, It shows that collective action can really make a difference.
It's a powerful message.
It makes you think, what if we applied that same energy to other problems, like, poverty or environmental issues?
Yeah. What could we achieve if we all worked together like that? It's something for our listeners to ponder for sure.
Absolutely. The Driffield navigation story isn't just about a waterway. It's about the power of community, the importance of preserving our heritage, and the hope for a better future.
Well said.